I know people warm up their last days.
Oh yeah, we did all these big RC planes. You have to throw these over around everywhere.
There's a lot of homework for them to be here.
All right, David emailed me, said he's not gonna make it. And, I don't see Alberto, I don't see Chris. And Brennan said he was gonna come back, he couldn't figure out last week because that was too much for him. So, I think that's probably everybody for today. So, let's get started. All right, welcome to week 3. Just a reminder, no class next week, it's Memorial Day. No new students, and thank you guys for the pizza last week. It was much appreciated. And David sent an email wanting to thank you. Study materials. Everybody kind of was asking me, and at the beginning I didn't really have a particular lesson plan or anything that I was using as a basis, but I do recommend the FA Airplane Flying Handbook. There's a second book, the Pilot's Handbook of Aeronautical Knowledge. This is printed by a company, just about 20, 30 bucks. But it is an FAA publication. It's got that FAA 8083 3B. I don't know if 3B is the current one or not, but you can get that free on the FAA website. It works pretty good on iPad. I'm still a print book kind of guy. But that'd be a good book to get, maybe even this one.
3C is the one I printed.
Okay. Yeah, I think that is the current version. I think that's just an old picture there. Other things you can get would be the San Francisco VFR chart. It'll look like that. It folds out. It's a big map. Probably should have pulled one out because we're going to be talking about flight planning and charts soon. Another thing is called the chart supplement. It's a little green book like this. It has information on all the airports in the Southwest region. But this is one of those things you're supposed to have because it gives you the current information about your airport you might be going to. So you might only ever use 2 or 3 pages in this, but and then these have a short validity period, but for the purpose of this class, even if you had an expired one, would be good enough. Except you can't buy expired ones anymore, so I think that's only $8 or $9. And I think you can get all this online on Amazon, but if you can't, let me know. I can find a place for you. Other thing is called a plotter. Looks like that. It's about 18 inches long. It's used for flight planning with your chart. And the last thing is the E6B flight computer. It looks like this. It's a mechanical computer. Helps you calculate wind and a whole bunch of things. And I am very weak on this, so Dad's gonna be teaching me because I need to learn it again too. All right, mostly talking about airport procedures today, windsock, segmented circle, airport and runway markings, airport layouts, traffic patterns, got hand signals, looks like a duplication there, markings, airport diagrams, taxiing, and I've got a couple other things in case we come up short on time. Okay, the windsock. Anybody know what a windsock is? Somebody knows what a windsock is, right? You know what a windsock is. You've been flying, right? Looks like that. There's one over there. There's one on top of the hangar next to us here.
We also have them at the prison to know when to throw CN gas and when not to throw it.
That makes sense.
So we don't get blown
Don't you throw it and get in your face? So it's a giant nylon tube with a taper to it, and as the air flows into it, it points in the direction of the wind. They're also used to determine the wind velocity based on how much it sags or how much it's pointed. It indicates wind direction, wind speed. Most windsocks usually indicate 15 knots when they're fully erect. Why does it matter? Because we always want to take off into the wind. We need to know the wind direction for landing. Landing in a crosswind can be very difficult to control the airplane. And we don't want to take off or land if the wind velocity exceeds the airplane's maximum component or your personal minimum. Something like the little 120 could be real hard to fly in a 15-knot crosswind versus maybe the 182 or something. Here's an example of this would be a graduated windsock with the colors. I don't see this very often. They're usually just a one solid color. But each little section like that is indicating 3 knots of speed. And when it's fully opened up, it's 15 knots. Other wind indicators you'd see at an airport, in addition to the windsock, would be the tetrahedron or the wind tee. Wind tees are pretty uncommon. You don't see those very often. My examples are mostly private airports where I've seen those. The difference between the windsock and the tetrahedron, anybody have a guess?
Tetrahedron doesn't tell you the airspeed.
Yeah, I think you're right on that technically. Well, here will be examples of wind tees or modified tetrahedrons. Occasionally there's an airplane on a stick, but I think these are all private airports. I don't think they're FAA legal wind indicators. Here's a tetrahedron. I bet you could visualize the wind hitting it, right? It's gonna point into the direction of the wind. But a windsock follows the direction of the wind, right? So a windsock would be pointing that way. So the tetrahedron points into the wind and the tail of the windsock follows the direction of the wind. Does that make sense? I think you guys talked about this a little while ago. Do you know what this is right here around it? These markings?
Compass markings.
Segmented circle. So that's usually on an airport somewhere to indicate A, that there's a wind indicator in the middle of it, and the direction of the traffic pattern. So these little lines here probably mean that over here there's a runway that parallels that course there. And they want you to turn that way in the traffic pattern. So if this was your segmented circle at an airport, you could probably expect that there's a runway this direction and a runway this direction. And these little tabs indicate which way they want you to turn. We'll talk about the traffic pattern a little bit later. So here is a segmented circle. There's a little windsock in the middle of it there. Here you can see your runway over here. So that's telling you to turn that way for your traffic pattern. It wants the traffic pattern on this side of the airport. That might be because there's a town over there, or a school, or a mountain over there, and they don't want you to find that. Here's another segmented circle at an airport. Here's the runway. Here's our diagram of an airport right here. We've got the 2 runways, and so we've got our segmented circle, and look at that. They want for this runway, you to turn this way. That runway wants you to go that way. They're trying to keep the traffic pattern over the airport on this one. Maybe there's a town over here, over there. Another thing about the tetrahedron is, although it does move with the wind, sometimes it can be locked into position because it's used to indicate which runway they want you to land. They want you to land that direction. So the windsock could be telling you something different from the tetrahedron. What other reason they'd lock those? I've never actually seen one.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. They want you, in this case, landing on 2-2. The windsock could be pointing somewhere completely different.
Yeah, this is telling you land 2-2, but we'll talk about it later. You see the X on 2-2 and X on 4? That runway is actually closed, so you shouldn't be using it. But the windsock might be telling you, windsock might be blowing this way, to tell you the wind's coming that way. So you want to take off into the wind, so you might take off which runway? The wind was blowing that way.
I think 4, but you said
4
it's
if it was
closed.
open.
Well, this runway's closed, this whole runway, so we can't use that, right? So
So
the windsock's blowing this way.
Yeah, 30.
It's all pretty crosswindy, right?
Yeah.
You want to go into the wind, so
18.
probably that way,
Yeah,
1-8.
Wait, you would take off from 18?
Yeah, that's because it's tetrahedron, so it's kind of.
Oh, that's confusing.
it's like a flag, right? So there's a,
Yeah.
In this video, we're going to discuss a very common question, which is how to interpret a segmented circle. Many new pilots find this concept confusing at first, but if you break it down into its component parts, it's really pretty simple. A segmented circle is a visual indicator that provides traffic pattern information to pilots at airports without a control tower. As you fly over an airport, you will be able to see the segmented circle on the ground and determine the correct runway to land on and the correct traffic pattern. Let's take a look at the components of a segmented circle. A segmented circle consists of a runway complex, a wind direction indicator, and the traffic pattern indicators. There are no runway numbers depicted, but the orientation of the segmented circle will closely match the orientation of the actual runways. This north-south runway could be runway 1836, 1735, or 1 and 19, depending on what runways the airport actually has. During your knowledge exam, you can determine the correct runway numbers from the information given in the answer choices. We will call this runway 1836. The L-shaped symbols around the circle determine the direction of turns to a particular runway. The long leg of each L is the landing strip indicator and represents the approach end or final leg to a runway. The short leg of each L is the traffic pattern indicator and represents the base leg. From this, you can determine whether a left or right turn needs to be made from base to final, which corresponds with left or right traffic respectively. But how do you know which runway you should land on? That depends on the wind direction, as you always want to take off and land into the wind. Check the wind cone to see where the wind is coming from. If the wind is coming from 340 degrees, you want to land on whatever runway is most closely aligned with 340 degrees. In this case, we want to land on runway 36, since that will give us the most direct headwind. Now, let's look at an airport with multiple runways. Here, the segmented circle is indicating a north-south runway with a northeast-southwest runway. Since the wind is coming from the east, or 090 degrees, which runway do you want to land on? Again, we want to land into the wind, so we would land on the runway with the most easterly heading, which is runway 5. Now, consider whether you should fly left or right traffic. Take a look at the traffic pattern indicators. Here, it shows the base to final turn will be to the left, so we need to make left traffic with landing on this runway. Remember, the runway numbers may not be labeled on your knowledge test. You'll be expected to use your resource management skills to derive the answer from the available choices. In this video, we discussed how to interpret the segmented circle and relate it to airport runways and traffic patterns. We hope that you've enjoyed watching, and as always, fly safely.
all right. Did everybody get that? So here's our airport. This is Tracy Airport. Might be an airport you go to. Here is our segmented circle. But look, it doesn't have any little arms on it. What might that tell you?
That there's
What
a
would you do?
control tower?
What's that?
Could there be a control tower?
I'm not sure. Control tower probably wouldn't have a segmented circle like that. It'll have windsocks, but probably not. The reason is there is an instrument approach that puts you on different sides. This book here and the map actually tell you which way the traffic pattern is. So here's our tetraheder. It's way over here. Let's say it's pointed that way. Which way is the wind coming from?
The west.
This is north.
Yeah.
That's west. So the wind's coming that way. You want to land into the wind. So which runway would you land on?
26.
26. Good answer. Okay.
Determine where I'm headed.
Tetraheder's doing that. Where's the wind coming from? Northwest. So which runway would you land on?
30.
3026 maybe?
Yeah.
You know? Kind of splitting the difference there. Which runway would you land on there?
30.
Probably. Right? Wind's coming straight out of the north. What about this one?
12,
8,
or is it 1, 2, or 8?
either.
Well,
Either 1, 2, or 8.
Yeah.
Wind's blowing.
Okay, these are windsocks. Which runway would you land on?
26.
Or, yeah.
So windsocks like a flag. This would be here. Would be the flagpole, right?
Yeah,
The wind's going that way. It's coming out of the west. Probably runway 26.
30.
Runway 30. Runway 8. Yeah. All right. Here's Columbia. Here's our segmented circle. It's right out there over the next to the tanker airplane. It's got a tetrahedron and there's a windsock over there. So if you saw this, which runway might you land on?
Can't see the runway numbers.
Yeah, I can't see.
Down.
This is 3-5.
3, 5.
Yeah.
3, 5.
5, yeah.
3-5, yeah. I did that on purpose. You're supposed to talk about runway numbers
Yeah,
later.
yeah.
but you're supposed to- So the runway number is the heading, magnetic heading, right? So it's 360 degrees. That's almost north, 180. So the opposite of 180 is 360, right? Talk more about that later. All right, here's a bunch of windsocks doing different things. 'Cause that happens here all the time. Which runway might you pick?
29.
I'd pick 29 because the wind is most down the runway here, right? Kind of all over the place here. Well, that's because there's a bunch of mountains and trees and it does weird things. That's a pretty common windsock layout. Generally use the one midfield, middle of the airport as your primary. The one down there is really for CAL FIRE and their helicopters. It's up on a hill and that's why it'll be doing different things. And then this one here is on top of the runway over here. And that's actually the best one for judging the wind if you're choosing to land here. What about here?
Three,
3.5
5.
or 2.9?
Yeah.
Let's say you were in a big airliner. You're not gonna land on the grass. Probably 3.5.
3, 5.
What did you do here? Now what's going on in this picture here? The tetrahedron points into the wind,
Yeah.
and what's the windsock doing?
The tetrahedron's locked into place, right?
Kinda
Yeah,
doing the opposite.
maybe this one's locked into place for some reason.
So you.
Which one has priority?
That's a
Say
good
the
question.
windsock, say the windsock, but,
Well, the windsock is telling you what the wind's doing.
right,
The tetrahedron is telling you
oh, where they're.
which runway
Which runway
they want you to use.
right.
And they're usually, they are pivoted, so they're supposed to swing with the wind. But they could be locked down because they want you to land a certain way. But
Run
if the
2-3
airport says,
out.
we want you landing runway 29, you're going, well, no, that's what the wind's doing.
Can you do 290 opposite direction there, is that?
You could land that way, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It doesn't have the numbers, but that would be 1-1. I'd land that way,
Yeah.
1-1. Anybody see anything wrong with this yet?
Be this guy.
Oops.
Oh, no.
Not be this guy.
This guy was all over the internet for a year.
But then he had his camera rolling.
Good thing you had his camera. That's what's great about so many of these videos. The one the Chinese kid flipped it over. I mean, These guys are also prioritizing with their, distracted with their cameras.
But the last thing I do is post it on YouTube.
Exactly.
Gotta hurry up and get this online.
I know.
Good thing.
Look how dumb I am. Well, hey, got a lot of views, right?
Might help
Might
somebody.
cut another flame for him.
Help somebody.
Okay, airport markings. Or any questions on wind indicators?
Hello. So today we're going to finish our ground school, so to speak, and learn all about the markings, signage, and lighting that you'll find on the taxiways around an airport. So let's just begin by clarifying what a taxiway is. It's simply a path which allows aircraft to travel between the runway, the terminals, parking aprons, and hangars. At larger airports, they are usually constructed with a specific mix of concrete or asphalt, which is designed to take the weight of aircraft continually passing over it.
That's
So
what they are
let's
unless
start
you're
with some
Harrison
basic
Ford.
taxiway markings. You'll notice that all of the markings will usually be painted yellow. First, you have the taxiway center line, which is a single solid yellow line,
Like out here?
which simply marks the center of the taxiway. Next, you have the taxiway edge lines. These define the edges of the taxiway, and they are solid, double yellow lines. Sometimes a taxiway will run alongside a parking area, like an apron, for example. In this case, you may find dashed double yellow lines, which indicate that a pilot is allowed to pass over the taxiway edge. Another marking you may see is something called the taxiway shoulder markings. These are short yellow lines which sit at a right angle to the edge, and they are painted outside of the taxiway. These are usually painted on paved areas which cannot take the weight of an aircraft. These areas are usually built to prevent the ground from being damaged by jet blast. And then lastly, you may see some paved areas with a yellow X on them. These areas again must not be used by aircraft. Now let's take a look at some hold point markings. These indicate positions on the taxiway where a plane may need to stop and wait. The first is a basic taxiway holding point. This is identified with a single dashed yellow line which extends across the width of the taxiway. Next up, you have runway hold markings. These indicate a location where an aircraft should hold before entering a runway. These consist of 4 yellow lines. You have 2 solid lines and 2 dashed lines, like so. The solid lines indicate the side where the aircraft should hold. For example, if an aircraft is traveling in this direction, it would need to hold and wait for clearance from air traffic control before passing this hold point. However, an aircraft traveling in the opposite direction, which is going to pass over the dashed lines first, is allowed to proceed without ATC clearance.
So if you go in this way,
Now,
You can
as
go over the dash
mentioned
lines
about the
first.
hold marking,
You don't
may
need clearance for
also
that.
see something called the hold center line painted before the hold. This simply adds yellow dashes either side of the taxiway center line to warn pilots that they are approaching a runway hold point. Typically, the hold center line will be 150 feet long. The final hold marking you may see is the ILS hold line. This marking looks a lot like this. It's kind of hard to explain in words. It looks like a double-rung ladder to me, but it does serve a very important purpose. These holds are mainly used in very poor visibility when pilots who are landing are much more reliant on their ILS instruments. The radio signals being sent out by ILS ground equipment can be disturbed if an object gets too close. For example, if a plane was holding too close to the runway. Therefore, these ILS hold markings are set further away from the runway to prevent any planes or vehicles interfering with the ILS ground equipment and possibly endangering planes on approach. So that's most of the basic ground markings, but to assist with navigation, there are various signs which are used to identify taxiways, holding points, and other key areas. I'm going to try and explain some of the most common signs you'll find. So first, let's start with taxiway signs. Let's imagine that this long taxiway is taxiway Alpha, and then the short one is taxiway Bravo, both of which connect to a runway. Now, as I explain what the signs look like and what their purpose is, I'm going to be putting them in this blue box so you can see them clearly. it will always be a yellow letter on a black background. You'll most often see that sign paired with a direction sign. This is displayed before a taxiway junction or intersection, and it tells the pilot which taxiways are at the junction and which direction they are. You'll notice that the colours are opposite to the location sign, so you have a black letter on a yellow background. Now, let's imagine that a pilot is taxiing along here. When they reach this junction, they will see a sign that looks like this. So this sign is basically telling the pilots, you are currently on taxiway Alpha, there is a junction ahead, and you can turn right to taxiway Bravo. Now, signs like this can be placed on either the left or right side of the taxiway. It is also possible for signs to be painted on the taxiway itself. The colours are the same and the sign is simply replicated on the ground. Now, while we're focused around this Alpha Bravo junction, let's have a look at how a holding point would be identified. More often than not, holding points are simply labelled with the taxiway that they're on plus a number. So in this example, we're on the taxiway Alpha, and let's say that this is the first holding point. So we'll call this hold Alpha 1. The only difference is that the location sign would have made A1 at this holding point. So that pretty much covers taxiway related signs, so let's have a look at runway signs. Now, when a taxiway meets a runway, you will see red signs with white writing. When you approach the hold, this sign will most often have the runway numbers separated by a hyphen. So let's imagine that the pilot was taxiing along and they did turn onto taxiway Bravo, so they're now in this position. They would most likely see a sign that looks like this. First, you have the Bravo location sign to confirm that the plane is on taxiway Bravo, and then the runway sign which has the runway numbers. In this example, it would be 09 and 27. Now, if the numbers were reversed like this, that would mean that the 27 end of the runway is to the left and the 09 end is to the right. This helps a pilot identify which direction to turn and which end of the runway is in which direction. I hope that makes sense. Alternatively, if a pilot has already taxied to the end of the runway, they may only see one of the runway numbers because they can't turn in the opposite direction. So let's imagine that our pilot continued taxiing along Alpha and went all the way to the end of the runway. They may see a sign like this, a location sign showing Alpha and a single runway number, 09. Like taxiway signs, these signs may also be painted on the ground. And the last runway related sign you may find is an ILS hold sign, which has the same color scheme as a runway sign but simply contains the letters ILS. These will be placed beside ILS hold markings to clearly identify them. So that about covers the basics for signs. And I know what you're thinking, the screen looks an absolute mess right now. So let's turn down the graphics and get some lights on so we can see what the taxiway lighting looks like. So the first set of lights are the taxiway center line lights, which are steady green lights embedded along the center line. Next up, you have the taxiway edge lights, which are
You won't see green lights in a small airport like Columbia.
Now it's worth mentioning that on straight taxiways, the lights may be spaced out, but at junctions or intersections, these lights may be put closer together to clearly mark the junction at night. Next up, you have clearance bar lights. These are three steady yellow lights which indicate a holding point on the taxiway. Usually they sit near the center of the taxiway. The next set of lights you may see will be the runway guard lights. Now there's two variations of these lights. The first is two sets of two yellow lights either side of the taxiway, and these lights alternate slowly, like so. The other variation is a row of steady yellow lights, which extends across the entire width of the taxiway. And then finally you have the stop and bar lights, which may replace the runway guard lights at a major runway junction, like the far end of a runway for example. These are a set of red lights which extend across the taxiway at a runway hold point. You will also see two steady red lights either side of the taxiway. Now, interestingly enough, these lights can be turned on or off. For example, when a plane has to hold, the lights will be turned on. However, once a plane has clearance to proceed, the stop bar lights are turned off, and sometimes a set of runway lead-on lights will be turned on as well. So, I know that might have been a lot to take in, but that pretty much covers the essentials of taxiways. As always, if you've got any questions, don't hesitate to ask. Now, I'm not sure what my next tutorial is going to.
All right. Anybody have any questions on that?
Those hold short lines, you see that, would you see that at a non-8 air traffic controlled
Yes.
airport?
Yeah, this is a very common and standard marking. You know, if you went down this taxiway here before crossing the runway, you'd see that.
So you wouldn't wait there until obviously air traffic control cleared you.
Yeah, the reason is you're supposed to stop.
Yeah.
And they want you to stop because they want you, if you're going this way, they want you to stop and look for that traffic. So if this is an uncontrolled airport here, you don't cross, you check, make sure the space is clear before you can proceed. Now the dotted side, the idea is, let's say you're coming, let's say you landed here, you want to turn this way for whatever reason, you get to cross that, or let's say you land on this runway here, you get to cross the dotted side. That's telling you can go that way, but the solid line is preventing you from going that way.
So almost like how you would drive on the road, the solid lines being
The markings are a lot like a road, right? A solid line, you're not supposed to cross, the double solid line means don't go past that. That's the reason they put them horizontally there. So on this little airport here, section A is pointing at that little red box that says runway 19. That's the taxiway sign for runway 19. B there is showing the ILS hold. You'll see that at some big airports, and it's a lot like this line, except if they have instrument traffic landing, they're going to want you to hold there, because if you're there, you're too close to potentially critical radio equipment. And that's the reason for that. So if you're at Modesto on a really foggy day, you're going to end up holding at the ILS, and there'll be a little red box right there that says ILS, so the controller will tell you to stop there. You won't see that at an uncontrolled airport. C here is showing roadway markings for cars. Columbia doesn't have them, but airports like Tracy or Livermore kind of have that marked out to keep cars away from taxiway areas. Non-movement area, let's see, that would be, like this is technically a taxiway here. How'd that mark like here?
Well, the irony is, we were talking about that, a yellow means it's a taxiway, but you will see a yellow center line go into between the hangars, which is not a taxiway. So there's a little confusion there, but basically that indicates, being yellow, that it's not a runway, because it's white paint on a runway. But non-movement area would be, like over here where the
All the tie downs are.
yeah, or the tie downs, and where airplanes park would be, where airplanes park would be a non-movement. That's a great description.
Yeah, you could almost imagine maybe a row of hangars here or something like that,
And what it really refers to, when there's a tower, non-movement might mean he can't see it from the tower, he doesn't control it, so you're driving around on your own at a controlled airport where there's a tower. He controls your movement, but not in a non-movement area. You might be driving around, you don't need a clearance to move until you would need a clearance to get on an active taxiway to the runway. That's
and even this drawing's a little incorrect because it calls us a non-movement area, but it's also calling this taxiway alpha here. So this black sign with the yellow letter indicates that's the name of the taxiway, whereas the yellow sign with the black letter is telling you that's an adjoining or adjacent taxiway. Everybody get that?
Yeah.
We'll go a little more into signs here in a minute. That means you're on Alpha. That's telling you
Alpha's
that way is Alpha. Nothing on this here is telling us what taxiway this is called here. Go to the next one.
Got a question.
Oh, yeah?
There might have been a lot, they kept, this is a pretty early class to be just dropping casually ILS, you keep hearing it's ILS. And not to confuse, that means Instrument Landing System, and the relevance to that previous diagram is that was an ILS runway. Whereas the runway markings are part of the Instrument Landing System that is a ILS.
That's why it's not marked on the.
Yeah, so in other words, the ILS, what we know is in the airplane, there's an indicator up, down, and left and right that he's following down to the runway through the clouds. We don't have one of those here, but it's specific to this discussion because it's showing a painted runway that is part of that instrument system. So when they kept dropping that term, it's important to know. So the hold short lines and these markings that he's gonna go over now are gonna be different at an airport that has an ILS or maybe another instrument approach system versus, but there's different types of markings with different types of instrument approaches.
Yeah, ILS is not something you're gonna see here, and that's instrument flying stuff, so don't need to worry about that too much. But that's what that ladder looking line means. So if we were taxing this way up to it, you'd stop, and the controller would tell you to hold there. Otherwise, you're looking for that stripe. That's your hold spot. So if you're taxiing out to the runway, getting ready to take off, you're told to hold short of the runway. You can stop there. This, I really don't see that very often. I guess I'm trying to think of an example where I've seen that before. This is more common, so, well, this is more common than this, but you can see they're almost the same, right? The dashed lines on one side and the solid line on one side, but this is doubles of each. This is the edge of your non-movement area. So if you did see that, that would indicate one side is controlled by the air traffic controller and the other side isn't. Do you know which side would be controlled by the traffic controller and which one isn't?
Solid, the dotted.
Right? So if we were going this way, we can't go that way, probably because that side is controlled by the traffic controller. But we could come from this side, that way. So this would be the non-movement area, and that would be the controlled area, or the movement area. Taxiway edge markings. The reason you'll see that, like we don't see it here, is because the shoulder of the taxiway could be paved, but isn't meant for airplanes to be there. That's so an airplane doesn't blast rocks or dirt or something around on the taxiway. If you saw this on an edge, that means you could cross through that, and this could be the taxiway going this way, and there could be a parking area here, so you can cross through that. And these are taxiway and runway signs. They could be a physical sign adjacent to the taxiway, or they could be painted on the taxiway. Red indicates a runway. The yellow indicates an upcoming adjoining taxiway, and the black sign, again, is the taxiway you're on. So here's some signs. So this would tell you that you're on taxiway Alpha, and to the left is runway 4, and to the right is runway 22. This sign would tell you, it doesn't tell you what taxiway you're on. It would tell you that you're crossing a runway 26 or 8 to the right. Approach. That means it's the end of the runway. It's an area that's not used for takeoff or landing, but you could pull onto that portion of the runway and use it for takeoff. ILS, that's the instrument stuff we're talking about. That would be your holding position, that line that looks like a ladder. That one right there. That is pretty universal. I mean, stop, don't go that way. Could be a closed taxiway, could be construction, any number of things, don't go there. The black sign, again, that's the taxiway you're on. Hey, that's an unusual one. I don't know what that one is. You'll see this one on the runway, that's a big runway. That'll usually mean 4,000 feet remaining on the runway. If you go to like Castle and Merced, it's a 10,000 foot long runway. As you're going down the runway, it's starting to count down how many thousands of feet remaining. If you need those when you're landing the 140, then you need to get your practice up a little more. We've seen that one. Here would be a taxiway intersection sign. So let's say we're going straight up here. That would mean that taxiway Juliet crosses us at maybe a 45-degree angle. This one would mean taxiway Kilo is approaching us to the left. I guess that one means runway 22 is straight ahead,
Correct.
going maybe down a nice long taxiway, and you're
Correct.
going, where the heck is that?
Yeah.
You know, runway. I've never seen that before.
Means you're on a military and probably a joint use airport, and the military guys are over there.
Yeah. It says nothing about military there.
Doesn't mean mother-in-law because it'd have an X through it.
Mother-in-law.
It's my mother-in-law. So,
Taxiway end marker, that actually, you'll see that right now. If you get out here and look down the end, you'll see that down there. So someone will tell me what this one means. Let's interpret this one. Brad. So let's say you saw this. We're taxing this way.
right,
What does this sign mean?
that you're on taxiway G,
Yep,
taxiway L is to the right,
yep.
and alpha's back right
Right.
or back left.
Yeah, very good.
Here's more of these, so let's try some of these. All right, Aiden, what's that one mean?
On B, to the right is C, to the left is C.
All right, we come up this way, and then taxiway goes like that?
T.
Yeah. What's that one mean? Aiden, come on. Same thing, right?
Same thing, it's just
Left and right,
oriented different.
just different, right? Apron would be like a parking area or something like that. So you might be going up the taxiway and see that, parking area to the left. Carson. Taxiway G to the left.
Yeah.
Off
G2,
the
you
runway.
might see that. Big airports with a lot of airliners, they're at, you probably think of an airport, let's say this is our runway, north-south like that. Then everything's laid out in kind of a grid, you know, you might have a taxiway here, and you have a taxiway here. But some of these big airports actually have taxiways that go at a 45 angle. That's so the airliners can land and get off the runway real quick. So you'd have a taxiway that goes this way, that would be Golf, but it might also go this way, and that would be Golf 2.
Right.
Or Golf 2 to the right.
But why wouldn't they just name them different letters? Like,
Probably because, you know, they made this one Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, and then they added it later, is my
Oh,
guess. I don't know the answer to that. I'm with you, it should just be a different one. All right, Wyatt. Give me this one.
you're
Write this one
on
down.
taxiway B.
We're going this way on Bravo.
D's going
Yeah.
diagonal.
D would be that way.
C is going to the left and right. And
Charlie's that
E
way.
is also.
E's that way. D's that way. So D is that way and that way. So it's probably one taxiway like this, huh? And there's probably Charlie. There's probably one taxiway like this. And Echo goes like that. So it's probably an X with a
Yeah.
taxiway. I mean, intersection markers. You don't see that very often. That'd be a big runway where a little airplane, they don't want you taxiing all the way to the end. You can take off from the middle of the runway kind of thing.
it brings up meters. Part of what this is over the course of years they've developed this. This system is worldwide. If you went to France or England, in the old days, every country sort of had different markings. And that's kind of the beauty of this thing is, those markings, I'm not sure about the Eastern Bloc, but, anymore. I don't know if we do anymore in the Russians,
But short of a Bravo airport, I've never seen that before. Right?
correct. And the other thing I was gonna point out is, this is usually associated with, control tower type airports, which would be, we get into that called Class D, when we get into, airspace things. This is not exclusively, you can have a non-towered airport like say like Castle, but, you may go to an airport like here and you won't see any of those signs.
Yeah, this is frequently a larger airport that you might not go to in your private pilot training. Castle is a former Air Force base, so it has all this stuff. That might be where you see it, but no, a place like here, you won't see it. You won't see much at Pine Mountain Lake. Modesto is a very simply laid out airport, so there's not taxiways at angles and stuff. They're always, just to a 90-degree angle. So this is pretty in depth here, but the biggest thing you need to understand is the black. What did you say earlier? Black on track, something like that.
Yeah, if it's black, you're on track. So that's how you remember that you're on.
That's the that's the taxiway you're on, and that'd be the one you're approaching. So if you land at an airport and you're not sure where you are, you can ask the controller to give you taxi instructions. He'll tell you where to go. He'll say, turn left at Alpha, cross Bravo, right at Foxtrot, left at Lima. And you're going, what does all that mean? Well, write it down, and then just follow the signs. You'll see where the signs are.
And
I tried to find a better map. I don't have a good map, but we're gonna do.
But yes, ultimately, it'll be in your airport display. When you get to the little airport, you'll see all the airport markings. So when you're doing your flight planning, you'll know when we get there, we're gonna probably turn left on Alpha or whatever.
I got airport diagrams. And we were talking about this the other day, the enhanced taxiway. I've never noticed it before, but here's your taxiway line, and these dashed ones on either side means you're approaching a runway. And there's your hold short line right there. So you can't pass that until either you get clearance, if it's a controlled airport, or in case of here, actually, here it won't be the double line, huh?
No, that's a hold short. You're exactly right.
Well, let's say the end of the taxiway here. Would we see that, or would that be just the single?
I don't think we'll see that at an uncontrolled airport because.
So it would just be the one dash line and one solid line?
Yes.
Yeah. There's a little more on the signs. Again, the red signs are the runways there. There you don't already know. All right, runway markings. What's a runway?
Kick off the
Kayla, your turn. What's a runway?
When you take off the line.
Yeah, right? These aren't hard questions I'm asking you guys, come on. All right, test question. What's a runway? It sounds kind of trivial, right? Defined as a rectangular area to land or take off. All that other stuff. You might see that in the question, throw you off. Why ain't you taking off? It's easy. runway number is this?
27, right.
7 right. What do you notice about the color of the markings on this compared to all the taxiways? White. Runways are white, taxiways are yellow. Runway number is your compass heading, right? We get that? So it's 360 degrees on a compass. So runway 26 might be 260 degrees, 261 degrees, 265 degrees, so on and so forth, right? Here's what a compass looks like in your airplane. This would be often called a whiskey compass or a bubble compass. It's filled with a liquid, and that little barrel there spins around. And this would be called a directional gyro, and this is a round instrument that would be on your instrument panel. Most airplanes will have both of those. So when you line up on a runway, you're going to check your compass to make sure you're on the right runway. And in this, your directional gyro is adjustable. It might not be set properly. So you turn your little knob and you'll want to set it. You usually do that before you line up on the runway. So that way, when you line up on the runway, you can make sure 26, 26, you're in fact on the right runway. If the controller says, runway 18, it says 26, 27. Might be the wrong spot, right? What's the number of that runway?
8,
That runway. That one.
3,
That one.
26,
That one.
30 left.
All right, there we go. See, not hard. Runway numbers, pretty easy. And the paint color. Runways are white. You can see, here's the taxiway. Talked about this taxiway end marks there. Those are yellow. This one's hard to see, but that's yellow. Everyone understands what the left and right means, right? 27 left and 27 right. Sometimes you can have two runways that parallel each other at an airport. And so instead of just having one runway number 27, we'll call it 27 left and 27 right. The center runway, you're not gonna see that until you get into big jets. That's Chicago and Dallas and stuff like that. Here's good old Modesto. Runway 10 left, runway 10 right. No, the reciprocal of that was how many degrees? Anybody remember? Runway 18. So what number runway would the other way be? 28. So this is 10 right. What runway number is this?
28.
And which one? Left or right?
No, it's left,
Right.
yeah.
If you go that way, it's on your left. Your right. Here's Livermore. 25 left, because that's 250. And that runway is 250, but it's on the right, so it's 25 right, 25 left. And then east, 070. Big one's on the left, small one's on the right. Believe it or not, I still mix that up from time to time. Here's another airport. This is Stockton. One on the left, one on the right. Right? Pretty simple, right? But that is, we haven't got into headings yet, but runways are in magnetic heading, so they should match your compass. We'll get, when we start doing flight planning, there's a difference between magnetic heading and true heading. And you saw in that little video there where magnetic heading is actually not at geographic North Pole, so there's a little bit of variation in there. And that's something you need to take into consideration when you're planning your trips. There's another big old one on runways. What I got this for was, this is called these are called thresholds here. So you see this line here, that's where the runway starts. The runway goes that way. But this was called a displaced threshold. It's can be used for taking off, but it can't be used for landing. This one cannot be used for takeoff or landing. X is, I guess, it means closed. These stripes, these all mean something. And this would be really in-depth stuff, but you'll see these big ones on most runways. You might not see these little guys or these little guys, but you'll see these. That's your aiming point. That's where you're trying to land. The reason for that is if you came up short, you've got some runway there. But if you don't want to touch down right here every time. So you're going to aim for a touchdown point. And the paved runway here has those marks. Let's see what else here. It's pretty good. It's a good one. There's a lot of stuff on there. Here is an airport diagram. I don't even know what airport this is. Here you can see all the different taxiways. There would be taxiway E or Echo. There's P or Papa. Taxiway Bravo there. So here's runway 27 right. Where's runway 27 left? Way over here. There's a whole airport in between. Big little terminal and all that.
Right one's always the long runway, is that what you're saying?
No.
Okay.
They could
I
be
thought you
any
said that.
number of ways. Just because they both have the same heading.
Yeah.
You know, if this one were like that, might have a different number. But this is kind of a common layout. The wind is usually probably coming this way. That's why they designed their airport that way. But you can see a lot of taxiways here. You know, let's say you landed here and you're turning off here at Papa. You've got taxiway Delta that'd be to your left and right. So you might turn off here. Your black sign would be P, and you would see a yellow sign that says D that way, and it would also have a yellow sign that says T6 pointing forward because there's taxiway T6. 7 and 8 there. So this is kind of complicated, but this is a very simple map to kind of show you where you are. So if you flew into this airport and you've never been here before, and the controller tells you, let's say we land here and we're going over here to this hangar. He might say, Echo at Papa, turn left at Delta. So exit at Papa, we turn left at Delta. You can say hold short of 27 right, so you can stop there. Then he might clear you out across the runway, tell you to go right into the hangars. And we'll do one of these classes. We're going to be doing radios, and we'll be talking about that kind of stuff. But it's nice to have the map, knowing where you're going. What do you think the X means on this runway? That's a good guess. That's exactly what that means. Why is it yellow?
To stand up.
I think that's the answer. I don't know. I looked that up. I couldn't find the answer. This is called threshold markings. You'll see on some bigger runways. Doesn't that mean each one of those is 1,000 feet, right, Dad? So this would indicate this is a 4,000 foot runway?
No, I don't think that's true. But I don't know the answer.
Or something like that.
That's a standard, that's a pretty standard ILS thing.
Yeah, size of all these things are standard. Here's the aiming points we talked about.
The actual centerline stripes are,
200.
yes, and that's kind of probably not a private pilot test, but it's a good one to know.
Yeah.
But yeah, the solid paint is your touchdown zone. The ILS glide slope will take you down to that if it had one, and that's where you don't want to drag the wheels across the very approach end. But the fact that there's 4 there, that's a standard marking.
Well, this is a pretty good question, but the best place to answer that really would be the back of your Airman's Information Manual. And I should add this to your list of books if you haven't got one already. But let's move on. Closed runway, yellow X's. Don't land on a closed runway. It's painted, Actually, this would be like tarps. They do this on the grass runway when they mow it every week. You could see a machine like this is got lights on it, so you see it at night. That looks like a tarp too. They put some bricks on it or something. I don't know why that one doesn't have numbers on it, but that would still be a closed runway.
Is this a runway?
Oh, does Brad know this one? I heard him laugh. So it didn't have a yellow X on it, so clearly it wasn't a closed runway, right?
Actually, I got a quiz question. What did he do right? I mean, obviously he landed downtown to get a 6-pack of beer. We could probably critique the heck out of that. But there actually is one thing he did kind of right. When Don DeLuise gets out the right side, the engine's still running. We don't really get out of an airplane with the engine running. But if you ever had to, he went behind the airplane. No.
Yeah, I guess so. For one thing,
I'm always looking for the bright side of something.
It's something right.
No, is this the same thing? No, it's the same one, all right. One thing we do kind of have to do here is drive across the runway. So the reason I'm covering this is not so much for test question stuff, but just so you guys as Columbia pilots kind of get the local.
All of us just shocked when we saw it. This is, I mean, insane. A plane colliding with an SUV driving on a tarmac at a Texas airport. Now it just.
So you can see that's a big deal, right?
What really happened in those harrowing
All right.
few seconds? ABC's Rob Nelson has the story.
It was a routine land.
All right, so here's our airport diagram. We were looking at those earlier, but you can see how simple Columbia is here. We're down here somewhere. And airport manager asks you cross down here. You drive down these taxiways here, cross here to go to the other side. That's probably because most of the departures come this way. The airplanes would be airborne by here. So if you're driving down here, you're not likely to hit the airplane. I cross here, and he doesn't like that. But that's because down here, I can't see this end when guys are taking off. So I do it here because I can still see down there. The other thing you have is you've got kind of a mountain here. In the summertime, Cal Fire likes to land this way because their base is right over here. And they'll come ripping around this hill here. And if you're hanging out here, ready to cross, there's big trees and bushes. You could drive out right in front of them. So if you are driving across the runway, you've got to exercise extreme caution. Look every direction when crossing, and turn your music off, put your windows down, be listening. If you've got a radio, use it. The other thing is we don't like driving across the grass runway because it puts divots and stuff in it. You're really supposed to come through the gate on this side, but the airport manager made the gate not work, so we have to drive across the runway. So just be careful when you do that. Okay, airport diagrams. There's a simple looking Columbia. What's that number?
35.
Well, yeah, that's the number 35, but what does it mean?
350.
It's the runway heading, right? It's 29 runway heading. What do you think these numbers here mean? What's 2607?
Distance and width.
That's the length of the runway, and that's the width of the runway. So this one's 73 feet long and 75 feet wide. That's
Feet.
about most of the information that gives you, right? It doesn't give you much more than that. Kind of shows you where taxiways are. This might be paved ramp, and we know that because we're from here, so we know there's pavement over there.
So they do it in feet, not meters.
Feet, yeah. Here is Modesto. And this is a lot more information on it, and it should. There's a bit more going on at Modesto. That says ELEV. Any guesses what that means?
Elevation.
Elevation. Elevation is 82 feet right there. That says elevation 86. Almost 4 feet difference between those two runways there. That doesn't really matter to you in a little airplane. As you get into bigger airplanes and instrument flying, that kind of stuff matters. But here's your diagram of the airport. There's north. Kind of shows you the hangars and where the layout of the taxiways and stuff are. Here's an example where we have taxiway Charlie and Charlie 1. So if you were landing this way and you wanted to turn left here, it might tell you to turn left to Charlie 1. Why would you go there? Well, because that turn might be harder to make, to turn on to Charlie, right? So that's probably the reason for that. This is taxiway Alpha. But look, they added these little ones here. Instead of calling them something different, they called this is Alpha, this is Alpha. There's Alpha 1, Alpha 2, Charlie, Alpha 3. And it doesn't really make sense why they numbered them that way. That's why there's a map. Let's see.
Variation.
Yeah, we'll get to that later. Is this map valid? Is this still a good map? Does anybody figure out maybe its effective date?
5 years. So.
May 19th, 2022.
It's good from 21st April to May 19th. Only good for 28 days. That's because it could change stuff. So you have to have the current one. With things like ForeFlight on your iPad or phone these days, you can get this stuff very easy. Back when you used to have to get a paper one, it was a little more difficult. And these airport diagrams were good for like 6 months or something, right? And now everything's on a 28-day cycle. Even the VFR charts are now going to some sort of lesser cycle.
I think the airport directory used to be for a year, quarterly, going way back. I don't know if they are anymore.
May till July.
May till July, May, June, July. Yeah, that'll be quarterly, 3 months, 90 days.
Has the frequencies in the top left-hand corner.
Yeah, so here's a radio frequency. We'll get into that later, but ATIS frequency is 127.7, tower is 125.3, or 257.8 is the UHF, the military frequency. UHF is double the VHF frequency, so whenever you see that, that's usually a military thing. Ground control is 121.7. Let's see, blast pad there, it's, I can't tell, 580 by 100 is what it looks like. Here it talks about parking. It's saying runway 10 and 28. I'm not sure how to read that. What's that read, Dad?
My eyes aren't that good.
No, it's not good quality, but PCN or FCN 38. What does all that mean? I don't know what that means.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I'll work on it.
Again, if you don't know, it doesn't make sense, you don't worry about it. There's a lot of stuff. I mean, there's a lot of information on here. I'm not really sure. These are longitude, latitude points. Oh, this got a lot more fun. This is San Francisco. Right, so it's got parallel runways here. There's 2-8 left and 2-8 right. But look at all these taxiways everywhere. You'll see this at smaller airports sometimes. This brown circle, HS1, HS2, that stands for Hotspot 1, Hotspot 2, Hotspot 3. That's a area of concern for controllers. Look at all the taxiways that meet right there. There's gonna be a lot of airplanes crashing into each other. So that's called Hotspot 1. Hotspot 2, not another taxiway there, but why might that one be kind of a busy spot? You've got 2 airplanes landing, you got a guy landing this way, maybe that guy exiting there or something. That one, why is that one busy? I don't know, it's one of the things. Dad would know.
What is it?
Hotspot 2 at SFO?
Hotspot is a good term. That means extra attention.
Yeah.
You know, in other words.
Well,
it's
why
really
is Hotspot 2 there? Why would that maybe be a?
Well, because it gets confusing, because you got live runways in this case, and people have screwed up probably. In other words, it's hotspot refers to extra attention. I mean, you can't be sleeping anywhere around here, taxiing, but that's what hotspot means.
This is the same thing we're looking at.
Yeah, I'm trying to look up with the SPCN. These I think are specific airplane categories, but I'm not finding it.
That one video talked about how the FAA measures the runways every 5 years for the magnetic change. Here it's saying January 22, annual rate of change was 0.1 degrees west. So I suppose, why is that there? We're gonna sit there and figure out, well, how much later is it? If the SFO changes the numbers on the runway, it'd be a big deal. Everybody will know about it. Here's all your frequencies for SFO. There's a lot of stuff to know, huh? Yeah, care to elaborate on some San Francisco frequencies?
Yeah, could do that. So starting up there, Unicom is talking to the gas guys. Like we have a Unicom here that you would talk to for gas, and he's the one guy that is a radio here. It might give you wind and you can talk to him. He's not a FAA controller, it could be the gas person, whatever. ASOS, Automatic Surface Observation System. There's and we have one here called an AWOS, Automatic Weather Observation. And it's a little automatic weather thing that you pick up the wind and cloud cover and other information. Ground control is the guys getting around on the ground. Tower, we'll have a couple towers. Well, the second number is the military. See, it's twice, like you said. Not always exactly twice, but usually it's just twice. 269 would be a military number. So if you're on 20.5, flying, coming into land and taking off, you wouldn't hear the military guys, and they don't hear you. But everybody is on the tower frequency. All the airplanes airborne, you know, from clear to takeoff till they get to handoff. Then the NorCal approach is after you've taken off, you get to a point right away after you're gone. He says, "See you later, contact NorCal approach," and that guy takes you through about 15,000 feet. So, and then that's sort of this side and that side. I mean, you don't have to know that. There's an east and a west. So it's northwest through east is one frequency, southeast through west would be the other frequency. Clearance delivery is when you're gonna take off, and this is Cessna 123, and we're going to Columbia IFR. Well, even if you go VFR, to leave the airport, you have to have a clearance, not just from the tower, but a route and an altitude and all that.
And that's because it's a busier airport. So some busier airports have additional controllers.
Yeah.
But we haven't talked about that stuff.
But anyway, yeah, that's enough. These are on the particular departures. A STAR is a terminal arrival route. Let's see. Emergency for everywhere, 121.5. That's for everybody.
And that'll be a test question. Emergency frequency 121.5. We'll talk about radio stuff.
Yeah, that's enough from there. But yeah, there's
There's a lot of stuff just to maybe get out of SFO. Not that you're gonna use all of these on one given flight, you maybe use 2 or 3 of them, but it shows you how much stuff. Ooh, much stuff. All right, taxiing airplanes. Taxiing, spelled like this. I was 36 years old when I finally figured out how to spell that, so I looked it up. It's taxiing the airplane on the ground under its own power, as opposed to towing the airplane, where it might be towed by a car or a tractor. Some people do get those confused. Let's watch a good video.
Taxiing is the controlled movement of an airplane under its own power while on the ground. Aircraft taxi around the airports using taxiways to get back and forth between their parking spot and the runways. You may initially think that taxiing an aircraft is like driving a car, but there are some major differences between the two. Unlike steering a car with a steering wheel, small general aviation aircraft turn with the rudder pedals. Pressing forward on a rudder pedal will rotate the nose wheel in that respective direction. As you taxi around the airport, stay on the center line of the taxiways. Now, since you sit on the left side of the plane, the center line should be on your right. Specifically, the line should appear as if it's passing under your right knee or thigh. You can also reference the rivet lines on the engine cowling to maintain center line. Make small adjustments promptly to avoid having to overcorrect as you taxi. Be aware that while you taxi, the rudder pedals are connected to the nose through springs. Because of this, you have to be moving forward before the nose wheel will turn. There is also a small amount of lag between when you press the rudder to when the plane actually starts to turn, so anticipate leading the turns with rudder. Speaking of moving forward, the equivalent of a gas pedal in a car is the throttle in the plane. To accelerate, simply increase power by moving the throttle forward. Once the plane is up to the desired taxi speed, the throttle can be returned to idle, and more often than not, that idle power will be enough to keep the aircraft moving at that same speed. Like a car, aircraft have brakes. However, instead of having a single brake pedal, there is a brake associated with each rudder pedal. It is important to not confuse the steering controls of the rudder pedals with the braking controls. To steer, your feet should push forward on the pedal, pressing on the lower half of the pedal. However, to brake, you should slide your feet up and press on the upper half. With the 2 distinct brake pedals, you can brake each main wheel individually. Because of this, braking normally requires the pilot to step on both pedals simultaneously. However, these individual brakes can also be used to your advantage. Using what's called differential braking, you can make tighter turns on the ground than what would otherwise be impossible to accomplish with the rudder pedals alone. To make sure your brakes are operating correctly, a brake check should be performed at the beginning of each flight, as soon as you're ready to taxi. This is accomplished by releasing the parking brake, ensuring clearance with obstacles, adding a slight amount of power to start moving, then immediately returning the power to idle, and stepping on the brakes to make sure you stop. Pilots need to be aware of their surroundings at all times, especially while taxiing. They should try to visualize where the wingtips are and ensure that the airplane will not come into contact with any other airplane or obstacle. They should also not end up in a place where an airplane shouldn't be. With that said, the pilot should continuously scan the area, not only in front of the airplane, but also the sides of the airplane to ensure they stay clear of any hazards. Now, how fast should you taxi the airplane? There is no specific taxi speed limit. Of course, the slower the pilot taxis, the easier it is to stop or react to other vehicles, airplanes, or obstacles. But that simply isn't always practical. On a straight taxiway, a pilot can taxi at a reasonable rate, perhaps 15 to 20 knots. When operating at an unfamiliar airport, in tight areas, or while turning, the airplane should be taxied slower to ensure safety. Remember to reduce your throttle once you've reached your desired taxi speed. It's also important to minimize brake usage, so do not apply the brakes while the throttle is forward. You wouldn't step on the gas pedal and brake pedal at the same time while driving a car, so don't do it in an airplane. On a brittle ramp, our speed limit is 10 seconds between tails, which is roughly 2 knots. In order to achieve this slow speed, keep the throttle at a low RPM setting, keeping your feet positioned near the brakes so that you can press them down gently when you notice yourself speeding up. We mentioned earlier that the yoke was used to taxi, but we haven't yet discussed its purpose. The yoke is used to correct for wind while taxiing. It's important to continue to fly while on the ground. Even though you're not airborne, you still need to have the mentality of flying the aircraft, because wind is always a factor. If you do not have proper wind correction, maintaining directional control may be more difficult. Worse, the airplane could potentially get blown off the taxiway, or in extreme wind conditions, get blown over. In calm winds, the ailerons and elevator should be held in the neutral position. However, on windy days, the pilot should deflect the ailerons and elevator to keep the wind from lifting those respective flight surfaces off the ground. The pilot can use the windsock to determine which direction the wind is blowing from. A helpful saying that can be used is, turn into the wind and dive away from it. The proper procedure goes as follows. When taxiing with a left or right quartering headwind, hold the elevator neutral and rotate the yoke into the wind. This reduces the lifting action on the upwind wing and increases the lift on the downwind wing, which together counteract the wind from trying to lift the upwind wing. When taxiing with a left or right quartering tailwind, the elevator should be held in the full forward or down position, preventing the wind from lifting the tail of the aircraft off the ground. Additionally, the yoke should be rotated away from the wind. Since the wind is now coming from behind, the opposite aileron deflection should be used to keep the wing from lifting up. Taxiing the airplane safely takes practice, but in time, the mechanics of it will become second nature. Taxiing at a safe speed, using the proper crosswind correction, and looking ahead for any potential hazards will help ensure a safe taxi experience.
All right, any questions on that? He said there's no specific speed, but general rule of thumb is no faster than a brisk walking pace, especially in a tailwheel airplane, because if you had to stop abruptly, you could easily flip that airplane over. So you want to go slower when possible. Control the airplane on the ground, you use the rudders and the brakes, not the yoke and the stick. The yoke doesn't turn the airplane on the ground. And you'll see a lot of people trying to turn it like an airplane. Don't do that. It'd be nice to say just take your hands off it and taxi with your feet, but if it's at all windy or breezy, you need to still fly the airplane on the ground to prevent the wind from picking up and flipping it over. The only difference on taxiing a tailwheel airplane is we want to keep the tail on the ground. The nose wheel airplane, they wanted wind over the elevator to help push the nose forward. We don't want that on a tailwheel airplane. We'll talk about that if you decide to fly a tailwheel airplane. Bigger airplanes have thrust reversers, like big jets. You can use that to taxi backwards or help slow them down. What's about taxiing? Talk about taxiing versus towing. Ferry's towing the airplane, there's an airplane being taxied. Notice the elevators on this airplane? Sure. It's trying to pitch the nose of that airplane up, keeping the tail on the ground. So if you can imagine a gust of wind coming here. A gust of wind at the back could maybe pick that up. But if there's nose on the front of the airplane, that'll hold that tail down. Now he's making a little bit of wind with the propeller, and he's also accelerating forward. So there's generally probably going to be wind over the elevator this way. If there's more wind behind you when taxiing a tailwheel airplane, there's a lot of different things we do. But we'll talk about that if you go flying with me. If you don't have any radios at a towered airport, you'll get light signals from the tower. And this is not something you really need to memorize, but if your radio's quit on you one day, it's good stuff to know. Green light is usually a good thing, right? Clear to taxi. Red light, you know what red lights mean. Stop. Flashing red, get off the runway. Flashing white, go back to where you were. We're not going to put up with you. You've got your radio, we can't accommodate you right now. Alternating red and green light, exercise caution, they'll let you go.
So where is that light?
Comes from the tower. There's also the light gun signal from the tower for no radios for coming into land. That's a different set of signals, and we'll talk about those later. I I've never had to do that before. If the radios don't work and I'm trying to taxi, you just don't go flying. Ground accidents happen as a result of improper technique when taxiing airplanes. The pilot is responsible for the airplane until the engine's stopped. A taxi signalman can assist the pilot around the flight line. Some busy airports or flight schools like the one that made the video actually have a guy on the ramp guiding people out because there's so many airplanes going at the same time. You're not gonna see that here at Columbia. Pilot cannot see obstructions close to the wheels or under the wing and has a little idea of what's behind the airplane. Be aware of your environment around you. You can't see, there could be a person, God forbid, you know, a skateboard, a ball, a dog in front of you. So when you're taxiing, take it in everything that's around you. Be aware of what you're approaching and other potential objects on the airport that could be intercepting where you're going, another car, another airplane. This talks about a signalman, which we're not going to see, but there are some hand signs we'll go over a little bit later. Taxiing nose wheel airplane here in the wind. If you have front quartering wind there, you're going to use up aileron on the upwind wing. So this would be called the upwind wing because it's towards the wind. And you keep the elevator neutral. Likewise, if the wind is from over here, or if the wind is from behind you, you want that wing's aileron to be down and the elevator to be down. In the tailwheel airplane, we change the elevator input. But it also does depend on a couple more variables, the wind speed or how fast you're taxiing. I don't remember what that was for. Hand signals. Not really going to get this very often, but they're good to know. If you were to take off and go to Modesto and land at the FBO there, they're going to have a guy stand outside flagging you in. And these are some of the standard hand signals. First one there, start engine, is this signal, making a overhead. It's actually the same for a helicopter. Stop, maybe this or this. You'll probably see move forward towards you. If you're taxiing towards him, he'll be flagging you forward. Or go that way, go that way. Takeoff, landing, I don't think these are a little more military based. Another one that's important to know is, anyone can guess what this signal means? If I'm looking at you, doing this, what does that mean?
Turn off your...
It means fire.
Fire, oh.
I'm in fire.
Okay.
If you're in something like the 120,
Yeah.
somebody's giving you a fire signal. We'll talk about how to fix that later. Flying the traffic pattern. All right, it's flying stuff on.
When taking off or landing at airports, pilots use a standardized traffic pattern. The traffic pattern's main purpose is to ensure that air traffic flows into and out of the airport in an orderly manner. This makes the airport environment safer, since all aircraft should be following the same procedures. The basic traffic pattern is similar at all airports, whether it is controlled by a control tower or a non-towered airport. The traffic pattern consists of a rectangular shape made up of 5 different legs: departure, crosswind, downwind, base, and final. The standard traffic pattern is referred to as left traffic. This means that all turns in the pattern are made to the left. A runway could also have a non-standard or right traffic pattern, where all turns are made to the right. At most airports, the traffic pattern is typically flown 1,000 feet above the elevation of the airport. The pilot should enter the pattern on a 45-degree angle to the downwind leg, flying towards the approach end of the runway. When within about 1 mile of the runway, a turn should be made to enter the downwind leg, flying parallel to the runway and in the opposite direction of landing. The pilot should then fly 2 90-degree turns, one turn to the base leg and the the other turn to the final leg, while descending to his touchdown point on the runway. This allows them to properly set up for landing and to sequence themselves with other air traffic. An airplane that has taken off and is climbing out on runway heading is on the departure leg. When at a sufficient altitude, the pilot can either depart the pattern or stay in the pattern by turning onto the crosswind leg. If they decide to stay in the pattern, the pilot can turn back onto the downwind leg once they have spaced themselves out sufficiently and set up to practice another landing. There is one additional leg of the pattern which has not been mentioned yet. This leg is called the upwind leg and is also parallel with the runway, but located on the side opposite the downwind. This leg is typically only used if a pilot has to abort their landing so they can safely space themselves out from other traffic. Pilots in the pattern announce their positions in reference to these legs. If a pilot announces that they are on the base leg and about to turn final, another pilot on the ground would know that it's probably not safe for them to take off at that time. They'll then wait for the approaching traffic to land before they take off. At tower-controlled airports, ATC may instruct pilots to fly straight-in approaches or have pilots enter on the base leg. ATC may even run left and right patterns simultaneously. At non-towered airports, these procedures are not recommended. Flying the approved full pattern is the best way to avoid traffic conflicts when ATC is not there to coordinate non-standard arrivals and departures. As previously stated, standard patterns are flown with all turns to the left for reasons of terrain, noise abatement, or to prevent conflict with other operations. Some airports have right-hand patterns for some of their runways. Right-hand patterns are depicted on aeronautical charts, noted in airport facility directories, and shown by indicators on the surface of the airport, referred to as segmented circles. A segmented circle consists of a series of panels arranged in a circle, usually in the center.
We already know all
of the
about
airport,
this, right?
with extensions to show the runways and direction of the patterns if non-standard. In this example, the extension on the left shows left traffic when landing to the east, and right traffic when landing to the west. These panels surround the primary wind indicator so that it can be located more easily from the air. Airports with runway lights will usually mount a floodlight above the wind indicator in the segmented circle so that pilots can see the wind direction at night. A pilot can get wind information by radio, from observers on the ground, or from automated systems such as ASOS or AWOS that broadcast the information. A pilot can also use wind socks, wind tees, or tetrahedrons to judge the wind direction and speed. Most airports use one or more of these indicators. Wind tees and tetrahedrons are large structures that are free to pivot on their mounts so that they weather vane into the wind. Wind socks are orange conical flags that not only pivot on their mast, indicating wind direction, but will sag or straighten with changing wind velocity, allowing pilots to visually estimate the wind speed. Small airports may have only one wind sock, but larger airports usually have multiple wind socks, with one centrally located and the others near the ends of the runways, where they are easily visible to pilots on takeoff or landing. As airports become encroached by homes and developments, the pilots and airport operators may have to deal with noise complaints. At some airports, the pattern procedures may be amended to minimize the overflight of the more noise-sensitive areas. Nighttime curfews or restrictions to training activities such as touch-and-go landings during certain hours may also be in effect. To find if noise abatement procedures exist in an airport, you can consult the AFD or similar publications. When noise abatement procedures exist, informational signs outlining recommended procedures are often posted near the departure ends of runways. Flight schools and other businesses on airports known as fixed base operators or FBOs often have information on noise-sensitive areas and noise abatement procedures posted on bulletin boards or on their websites. It is also recommended to consult with local pilots and operators to learn about noise-sensitive areas.
All right, any questions on that? ton of sense? So if we're here, we're taking off. Here's runway 19. We're planning on leaving, that'd be called the departure leg. Or, let's say we're practicing landings and we want to come back and land. That'd be called flying in the traffic pattern. So you fly your departure leg, you turn left. This is called your crosswind leg. You can turn left again. You're now parallel with the runway. That's called your downwind leg. And that's because the wind is going this way. Well, it's not, that's why it's called downwind leg, but the downwind leg has the tail, the wind at your tail. You turn left, this is called your base leg. When you turn left one more time, your fourth 90-degree turn to make a rectangle, that's called your final. And each of these legs are flown a little bit differently. Here you're climbing. Usually you're climbing to about midfield downwind would be optimum to reach your 1,000 feet. Then you start your descent for landing. If you're coming in from out of area, you enter the downwind leg. If you know what the wind is doing. If you didn't know what the wind was doing, because there's no automated radio to give you weather information, you want to fly over the airport to see the windsock. So you might fly over the runway here, go, okay, I see where the wind's doing. Then you need to leave the area, fly back over, because you want to always enter the downwind leg at a 45-degree angle. There's nothing that prevents you from coming way over here and flying straight in, but it's generally not recommended to do that because you can't see any other potential traffic that's in the area. There's no requirement that airplanes have radios to talk to other traffic. That airplane doesn't actually have any radios in it, but it's legal to fly here. So you want to enter the traffic pattern so you could be keeping an eye out. If you just flew straight in, you might not see any other traffic. You might not see if there's obstructions on the runway. You don't really know what the wind's doing. You don't really know anything until you're real close to the runway, and that doesn't give you time to make any changes or change what you're doing. So, like entering the traffic pattern. If you had another runway here, this shows second runway. Generally, you wouldn't have two traffic patterns going simultaneously, but Columbia is a good example of an airport with two runways where we actually have two traffic patterns at the same time. A standard traffic pattern is to the left, right? Everybody remembers that? Left, right, I should say. Standard traffic pattern, you turn to the left. Here for runway 17, the traffic pattern is actually right traffic. It's a non-standard pattern. That's because they don't want you flying over the town of Columbia. So that puts traffic that's landing on runway 17 out here going this way. But if we take off from the grass runway, we could intersect with them. So one of those is reason you use radios to announce where you're at. And you also, of course, look outside the airplane so you don't hit anybody else. If you're taking off and leaving the airport, you depart. You could depart straight out, and that might be how you phrase your radio call. Cessna's departing runway 19 straight out, moving that way, going to the east. Or you could say you're departing northeast or southeast or something like that. Any questions on this at all?
So if the wind's going like the opposite way that it's showing right now, like.
Well, let's look at it. Here's our wind right here. Right, so the windsock is showing that wind is coming this way, or maybe that way a little bit. Make it easy, let's just say the wind's coming this way, coming from the east. Going that way. So you're taking off into the wind.
but say the wind like changes like direction. I don't know if that happens, but say-
Okay, yeah, it does happen. So let's say this is a controlled airport right now. When you take off and the wind changes, they might not change the direction that you're landing right away, especially if there's a lot of airplanes in the pattern. Typically the way I've seen it is they kind of wait until either the wind is too much from back here, because we don't want to land with a tailwind. But if it's 1 or 2 knots, sometimes they'll keep letting you go this way because it's too difficult to change the direction of everybody. But at some point, the wind picks up too much, they're going to have to change the direction of landing. Or sometimes they'll wait until the pattern gets a little bit lighter and there's 1 or 2 airplanes. And they might tell you, do a right 180 turn. You just turn around and come back in and keep landing. The tower will tell you. If this is an untowered airport and you're out here doing your landings, and let's say there's another airplane, you're talking to him on the radio, and you might say, "Hey, I think the wind's moved around. I want to land. What's the opposite of runway 19? What's the difference between runway headings? 18. You got it earlier. 18. So what number would that runway be?
37. Right?
No,
38?
37.
Or 3.
Yeah, I've been up since 37.
Runway 37. Say, okay. I want to land this way. You can talk to the other guy, turn around or something. I've never really seen that happen when I'm at an airport. Usually you get the wind information from the automated radio, and you make your decision which way you're going to land when you're approaching the airport. So if you're going to land this way, you come in from the north, enter your traffic pattern, or since a standard traffic pattern is left traffic, you probably actually want to come in from down here. Come in from here, enter your downwind for your left traffic, and that way. The facilities director, the little green book, and the VFR chart, the map, would tell you otherwise if they wanted right traffic. So it might say right traffic for runway 37 if they wanted you to go that way. There might be the town here or a big mountain, so it doesn't matter what the wind's doing. They want you going north of the airport. That's why they do it here.
If we're landing on 35, that changes the traffic pattern to a left traffic pattern.
Does not. Standard traffic pattern is left traffic. So if you're landing on 35, you'll be going 35 this way, you turn left, over there, downwind will be over here. But the non-standard traffic pattern is runway 17 landing, that's right. And it says on the chart, right traffic
but
for runway 19.
I meant if you changed and landed 35, you're still.
You're saying you're landing on 7 and then you decide you want to change?
Well, yeah, if you're gonna go 17, but then you decide to change.
Okay, so we're setting up to land. 17 goes this way. We're setting up to land. We're going, no, we don't like it. We've got a tailwind. Well, then you say, we're going to go around. We're not going to land. You continue upwind. And the way I would do is I'd continue your traffic pattern, do your crosswind turn, do your downwind turn. And if you saw no traffic in the area and you heard no traffic on the area, I'd make a left 180. And now you're on your left downwind. I don't think I've ever done that before. The wind doesn't change that abruptly. If the wind is that extreme and moving around, it's stormy, and you're probably not out flying around.
You said here the CDF's often in the opposite pattern though.
CDF lands, they don't care about a tailwind.
Right.
So you could be in
that
you
case,
could be
you just hold until.
Right, we could be going right downwind for 17, and they could come in, enter overhead, and land 35. My experience has been they kind of wait for you. We tend to think of them as fire trucks. We want to get out of their way.
Yeah.
But they really kind of let you do what you're doing. but it could happen. But in your training, the best thing to do is you continue flying and let them, you know, and stay out of the way. But they'll see it. Just announce where you're at.
Right, yeah.
And, you know, if he's gonna land 3-5, just say, hey, I'll extend downward. Give you time to land.
Keep going, yeah.
You just keep going.
Keep going.
Wait till he lands. I think that's kind of more of a local experience thing. You know, it's not too common at other airports to have like the fire tech trucks landing. So here's an airport with 2 runways, 2 parallel runways. So this would be, you know, 19 left and 19 right. So if you had a runway on the right side, probably the traffic pattern is going to be to the right, which is known as standard traffic pattern, correct? Standard traffic pattern to the left.
Yeah.
Standard to the left, right hand traffic here. So that could happen. You know, Modesto's like that, Livermore is like that, Stockton is like that. That's pretty common around here.
Why, yes, that's right. I am wearing my genuine Van Heusen flight instructor shirt. Got the stripes on eBay. Hello, everyone. This is Paul Bertorelli reporting for AtWeb. The reason I have my flight instructor shirt on is in this video we're going to take a look at a curious and unexplained phenomenon, and that's why flight instructors teach their students to fly enormous traffic patterns. Take a look at this genuine NASA animation shot from the space shuttle. As you can see, things here at my home airport are getting entirely out of hand.
We interrupt this video with a note from our legal department. This is not a NASA animation. It is a preposterous and poorly rendered fake. Do not take it literally.
Well, anyway, my theory is that we started to fly gigantic patterns when flight instructors started to dress like this, and we knew that when their pimples cleared up, they were going to be jet pilots.
But 150s ain't jets, and the problem with large patterns is that they tend to encourage long, straight-in finals. That means you're dragging the airplane in with power, and you're not honing your ability to adjust your glide path visually. You're training yourself to be a one-trick pony.
Our little cartoon interlude shows what happens on many dragged-in approaches. With power as the main glide path variable, the pilot ends up short or otherwise botches the touchdown and drops it in. The better way is a higher angle approach, which gives a clearer runway sight picture and more glide path options. I like to call that bottom glide path choice the chump profile.
Yes, legal once again. The word chump is a comparative term of art and is not intended to apply to any single person or group of persons.
And by the way, this isn't about flying a pattern so that in case the engine fails, you can reach the runway. What it's about is learning to fly a glide path and use all the options at your disposal to adjust it. That includes a slip, a side slip, a forward slip, a turning slip, not just power. You might need that skill someday if you have to stuff an airplane into a parking lot with an engine out. Now here's one way to set pattern size. Use a reference point on the wing or a strut and set it relative to the runway. In the card, I'm putting the runway about a third or halfway down the strut. Now I know that corresponds to about 2,000 feet, which is about a third of a mile. In any case, it could be well less than a mile on the downwind.
So what's left for our tight pattern exercise? If you use the oft-ignored 45-degree rule and turn base at or before that point, you'll roll out on a nice tight final and people like me won't get irritated.
I have been taught that you can't land a heavy single out of a power-off approach. Well, tell that to Bob Hoover. Seems to me he did it for years in a cabin class twin, dead stick no less. Now, I'm not Bob Hoover, and neither are you.
Yes, sorry, a final note from legal, if we might. If you actually are Bob Hoover, we are in no way implying that you are not who you are.
Seems a shame to let an addiction to large patterns and long, straight-in approaches get in the way of skills enhancement. Next time you're out flying a pattern, tighten it up a little bit. Use reasonable bank angles, watch your airspeed. And in any case, this, and this, and this is just a hell of a lot more fun and challenging than this.
Now I know I've been a little hard on
flight instructors in this video, and if you are one, I hope you'll take it in the spirit in which it's intended, which is to give you crap about flying large patterns. I'm Paul Bertorelli reporting for AdWeb. Thanks for watching. Oh, and if you need any stripes, let me know. I got some extras.
No flight instructors were harmed in the making of this
I
video.
love that one because a lot of, we talked about in the first week, Part 141 schools and big professional flight schools, kind of like that Embry-Riddle that makes all those great videos. They have great videos, but they put the shirts on everybody and they all feel like they're airline pilots, and the flight instructor kids have the minimum number of hours, 23 years old. They really don't have any experience and know what they're doing, and they'll fly these huge patterns. My contention is because they're trying to build hours, and it's easier than actually teaching somebody how to land. But if we go flying the 120, you know, we keep a nice tight pattern. We can do, for good, we can do one landing in 2 minutes. So, it shouldn't be 10 minutes of flying around for one landing. That's too much. All right, talked about. All right, we're at 8 o'clock. Let's rip through this real quick. VASI lights. VASI stands for Visual Approach Slope Indicator. You also see PAPI, which is Precision Approach Path Indicator. Here's a PAPI, here's a VASI lights. This is what they look like. So if this is the light and it's next to the runway, and you're coming in, and you're airplane number 1 here, you're gonna see white lights. Let's look at this column here, lights, because that's what we have here at Columbia. You can see three or four white lights on top of 3 or 4 white lights. That'd be really high. As you start to get into the correct glide path, you'll see one red light over white. If you get too low, you'll start seeing all red lights. That means you're too low. So how we remember that is white over white means you're out of sight. Red over white, you're all right. Red over red, you're dead. Don't go low. Always be high. Well, you want to be on your glide slope, but you don't want to be high. You can also see how the runway kind of looks here. When you're high, you know, the runway you're going to see extends beyond, you know, and kind of goes a ways out. If you're too low, you can't really hardly see the runway because you're right on top of it. You'll see a PAPI light at some airports. This is military stuff. This is what Navy guys look at when they're landing on carriers.
Hey guys, John from FlyBikeAlpha.com, and today we're going to be going over.
I think we're at the end here. Cool. Drones. Skip drones. You know all about drones. NOTAM. Used to stand for Notice to Airmen, but in the woke world just a couple weeks ago, the FAA changed it to Notice to Air Missions because airmen is mean to ladies. A NOTAM is a notice filed with the Aviation Authority to alert pilots of potential hazards along a flight route or at a location that could affect the safety of flight. Most commonly here, we'll see a NOTAM for closure of the runway because they're mowing the runway. They could issue a NOTAM because an airplane crashed on a runway, or there could be a fire between here and Mariposa. They don't want you to fly through there. That would be a fire would really actually be a thing called a temporary flight restriction. It's an area you can't fly over. But we'll go into those more later. NOTAM is a thing you're supposed to look up before you take off. You want to know everything about your route of flight, the weather, conditions, potential hazards, and likely, and just the same at your destination airport and your alternate airport. You plan a trip somewhere, you always want to have an alternate in case. Let's say we're going to Turlock and Turlock's closed because they had a crash. We're going to turn around and we're going to go to Modesto. You want to know everything about both those airports. Ground effect.
Now here is an airplane just about to come into ground effect. Now one of the things you need to know about ground effect is an airplane actually flies better
within about a wingspan of the ground, and that can cause it on the flare to just float and float and float, and that is one of the problems with ground effect. Now, why does an airplane fly better when it's within a wingspan of the ground? Well, here's why. Normally, when an airplane is flying along, we talk about the fact that there's higher pressure underneath the wing relative to lower pressure on top of the wing. And anytime you have this pressure differential, some of the molecules from the high pressure area are going to try and make their way around the wingtip, destroy lift on top of the wings. Well, anytime an airplane is flying, some of that lift on top of the wing is actually being destroyed in that fashion. But when an airplane gets within about a wingspan of the ground interferes with the ability of the air to make its way around the wingtip. And so some of that lift that would have been destroyed on top of the wing is no longer being destroyed when the airplane's within about a wingspan of the ground, and the airplane flies better, and that's called ground effect. On the test, you need to know that ground effect is the result of interference of the surface of the earth with the airflow patterns about the airplane.
Test
the
question.
airplane actually flies more efficiently in ground effect. So, having said that, would you say that ground effect increases or decreases lift? Well, it increases lift. The airplane actually flies better in ground effect. And does ground effect increase or decrease drag? Well, it decreases drag. Now, there are just two big problems with ground effect. First of all, if you're taking off in ground effect may result in your becoming airborne before you reach recommended takeoff speed if you don't use proper technique. Now, the airplane will fly, but it will have a hard time climbing out of ground effect. And therefore, if you take off too soon, you might wind up actually using a lot more runway to be able to start climbing. So ground effect may result in your becoming airborne before reaching recommended takeoff speed. And that's really a problem at high altitude airports. They had a guy who took off one time at Lake Tahoe, has an altitude of about 6,300 feet, and sometimes it gets up to 90, maybe 100 degrees at Lake Tahoe. They have really high altitudes and hot days, which makes the air even thinner. The airplanes behave as if they were at even higher altitude. They call those high density altitudes. We'll talk about that later on. Well, this guy took off at Lake Tahoe, and his pilot technique for taking off had always been to look outside the window and see if the runway was going by fast enough. And he'd say, okay, that looks fast enough, and he'd jerk back on the wheel and pull the airplane off the ground. Now, the problem is the airplane could fly in ground effect, but there's no way in the world that airplane could climb that way. So what happens to him is he flies the whole length of the runway about 5 feet above the ground and hits a tree at the other end. Guy staggered out of that airplane and said, ground effect caused that accident. Well, in a sense, he's right, but it's not ground effect that caused that accident. Ground effect doesn't cause accidents. What causes accidents? Pilots cause accidents. In this case, the pilot caused that accident by allowing the airplane to become airborne before reaching recommended takeoff speed. Now, here's the other problem with ground effect. If you're in ground effect with increased lift and decreased drag, and you have any excess speed on landing, you're going to have considerable floating. So could ground effect cause floating? Sure, because induced drag decreases in ground effect. So therefore, any increased speed or excess speed at the point of flare may cause considerable floating. So ground effect does cause floating on landing. And floating and ground effect will be most realized during an approach to land when you're less than how high above the ground? When you're less than 1 wingspan from the surface. So to sum it up, ground effect can cause you to become airborne too soon. And if your approach is too fast and the aircraft is less than 1 wingspan above the surface, you're going to have floating on landing. So now you know why an airplane will fly better when it's less than 1 wingspan above the ground.
And a low wing airplane, where the wing is lower, will float more than the high wing airplane, because here you've got more distance between the wing and the ground than a low wing airplane. All right, let's see. We'll save that one for later.
Just
for
like
next
a-
week, because that's kind of a long one. just make a lot more sense following a nice video about landing, but we'll do that.
You're not going to try to land here, are you?
Piece of cake.
So they say a good landing is one you can walk away from. A great landing is one where you can use the airplane again. All right, questions? All right.
I've got an answer.
Okay. What's the answer?
Because I didn't know, on our airport diagram, PCN at San Francisco, or whatever one we had there, is pavement capacity number. So those were other big airplane types that I didn't quite recognize, but that's not a thing you need to know. You're gonna know it because you're gonna know all these details. The rest of us don't know all that stuff, you're not gonna need to know. But in other words, it's the maximum weight that ramp could be.
This number here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So on these runways.
That airplane weighs less than 1,000 pounds. That doesn't matter.
But I didn't really recognize, I did think this two-wheel 400 they don't quite make sense to me, but that's PCN is pavement condition number. Just, and you really wow people if you ever come up with that.
Would that be relative to like how many wheels there are?
Yeah, as you get into wheel weight, some airplanes have concentrated wheel weight, don't have a lot of wheels, but the bigger airplanes have lots of wheels. Like a 747, we call it 18-wheeler. It spreads out, it's a million pounds over that. But you would never have to know that because it's already approved for where it's going. Yeah. Then the other one, hotspot. One good thing about all the FAA publications is if you go to the index, you can kind of find the answer to the question. So I did look up and found they're called hotspots. So the San Francisco HS2 is in there, and it will just describe, and it's verbose. It does say in the case of HS2, pilots landing on taxiway Charlie and instructed to turn right onto taxiway Echo, sometimes miss the turn and turn onto Echo and continue across runway 1 left and 19 by mistake. So you can see how it's really, there's a lot going on in one tight spot there. So let me reread that.
Read that again. I don't get it.
Pilots exiting turning right at Echo. Here. Sometimes
turn on the runway.
Yes.
Landing
hotspots
here.
Hotspots are just attention.
Instead of turning right on that taxiway, they maybe turn on one of the runways.
But these are black and white, and they do come out in red on the actual publication or your displays, your monitor displays. So,
and something heard of ForeFlight. It's an app for iPads and stuff. It's actually very interactive. A lot of times you can touch that stuff and it'll bring up all the details.
It'll explain to you. Yeah. Then one more thing that's kind of cool that he alluded to is reciprocals. Get used to that directional gyro compass, from 010 to 360. And be able to answer what's the reciprocal in your mind so that you know what runways are. And it comes pretty fast.
Terrible at that. Sometimes I can't tell if you should add or subtract.
Well, what I do, notice you only can go this way. You don't go through. There's no 3.7 and 3.8.
That's how you get your flight computer.
Yeah, get this.
Right. So there's your numbers. You don't even think about it.
Maps and stuff, but like when we're looking at those.
Well, you will see as we get into maps, we're going to be using it some more. But if you want to do an arithmetic, a little teeny algebra thing, I always go subtract or add, depending if you're going from the smaller numbers to big. I add 200, then drop 20. That's what's 180. Okay. So 070, I would add 200. It'd be 270 minus 20 is 25. So 07, 25.
That's easier.
And it's not 25, it's 25. We get into the pilot lingo thing with runway 36 and all that. But yeah, it's a good one to do that math. Does that make sense to you? I know it would, because you're good at math. But that's, a reciprocal is it's good to be able to rattle that off, because sometimes if you're landing on runway 35, you're going, well, what is the other one? Because you're making this radio call. I'm going to go around and land on, well, it's kind of on the map, but it's good to be able, reciprocals will come into your, come across you to be able to do that.
I did that just 2 weeks ago at an airport I hadn't been to. I thought I was setting up the correct runway. It wasn't until I lined up the runway and reading numbers, like, oh, that's the wrong runway.
Yeah.
It happens.
And reading the runway, you'll learn in flight training. It's important to read that number. And like when you're taking off, it's not real common, but sometimes there is an airport, there's 2 runways, kind of like a V, and you can taxi down here, and there has been crashes, because they took off on too short a run, and it was real close this way. So we always line up. One of the things we check is the compass. The taxiway that's a parallel is a great time while you're taxiing out there, and you're gonna see the opposite or the reciprocal on the bottom of the directional gyro, so you know that you're going to the right place. Little tricks like that.
Yeah, so if we were taxiing out this way, you were going to take off that way on runway 29 the grass, you could easily set, you don't need to know what the reciprocal is. You put 29 at the bottom of your directional gyro, the top will tell you which way you're going now.
Yeah.
It'll say 11, we're heading 110. And then when you turn left, you get lined up on the runway, it should say 29 on top of your directional gyro, so you know you're on the correct runway. If all these are parallel taxiways here, but an airport that didn't have a parallel taxiway, you wouldn't do that. But the parallel taxiway for the paved runway is the same. You can set it when you're doing that.
We've got a couple of older ones of this, but this is also combined, but it's called Airman's Information Manual.
Yeah, I gave away the only old one I had.
Oh, did you? Okay. Because we'd like to not throw them away. FAA kind of wants us to throw them away because it's not current, but it gets expensive doing all that, but we do that. But the way you tell when there's something new is there's a little revision bar, which I don't see any in here, but you see a black line on the left, like that means this is changed from the year before. But there's airport markings and a lot of, this looks really like a lot, and actually it is, but there's some spots that you go over more than others, but it's fun when you're wasting time. Here's all your markings and runway markings and tons of stuff.
Wasting time.
Not if you want to fly.
Yeah.
Cool, thanks, Greg.
I figured you use the old one as toilet paper. You read it and then use it.
Is there is there a fly-in somewhere over Memorial Weekend?
Next weekend, yeah. So we have this weekend here is the Cessna 180 Club, and then the Red Hills flying at Jamestown.
Oh, okay.
There's a little private airstrip out there.
Yeah.
You guys know where that is?
I think he's maybe good.
Can they get to that?
Airstrip. With
Yeah.
Red Hills Airstrip?
Like the little dirt one?
Little red dirt one over by
Oh yeah, that's
Jamestown?
where I was doing some filming.
He's landed.
Yeah,
there
it's the
first.
old film ground. It's the old famous place around town where
Yeah.
they used to do movies and stuff out
He
there.
has a more exciting life.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, if you guys drove in for that weekend, the fence will be open. And
You can roll in and check it out.
yeah,
Nice.
yeah, the guy that owns it, Jack and Myrna Moyle, they're very nice people. There's other people that are kind of hosting it.
Have they always owned that spot?
Oh, they've been there for 50-something years.
I remember Chris was having a hard time getting a hold of them, but let him know.
They kind of let another guy run all that stuff.
Oh yeah.
There's a guy that kind of volunteers to do. They ask. I don't know if they ask, but he asks for a liability waiver thing. So, but if you need that stuff, let me know. I'll